Okay, I'm sorry. All right. Welcome, everybody. I appreciate you coming and taking a look at this training. It's recorded. We did it live. I prefer live, and I know it's a little more interactive live, but we wanted to get this recorded and put it on there. If you do have any questions, I am going to have my email and my phone number at the end. I'll be glad to answer any questions you guys have. So, yeah, welcome to my training here. My name's John Summerendike. For those of you whose paths I haven't crossed yet yet, I retired from the Fayetteville Police Department December 1st, 2019. My last 5 years there, I was the Special Victims Unit Commander. We were very fortunate. We were awarded funding from the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative grant in 2015. I was the site coordinator for the Fayetteville, North Carolina site, and I was part of the SACI team there in Fayetteville. I've been helping out the state of North Carolina with the state of North Carolina SACI grant, the Attorney General's office, specifically their SACI grant, since I retired, basically. So again, just thank you again for coming here. We're going to talk about navigating sexual assault response reform, basically how to improve your agency's response to sexual violence. A lot of you already are. I know, I really wanted to make this relevant for all of you. I know there's over 500 law enforcement agencies in North Carolina, and I know a very few have a dedicated sexual assault response unit, a dedicated adult sexual assault response unit. Sorry about that. I'm getting popular getting texts here. And I know the large majority of agencies, you've got other things you're doing. You're working adult sex crimes and a lot of other crimes too. But I know there's a lot of agencies who are in the process of improving their response, who've done some great things over the years. Talking about Charlotte-Mecklenburg PD, Durham PD is really doing some great work. Down in Fayetteville, my old agency, they're doing some great work. But I really want to make this relevant for all agencies. And I think there's going to be some things here that I talk about that these old agencies who've been doing it a while, like Charlotte, Durham, and Fayetteville, they can pick up something from this. But really, if you're just beginning the improvement of your response to sexual violence, I think all four of these things I'm going to talk about will be relevant to you. All right, there's the waiver. Funding from the SACI grant was used to create this presentation. So yeah, I'm going to start off with, so when we were awarded the SACI grant in 2015, I was fortunate. I got to go to a couple of the national SACI grant conferences up in DC and I think Arlington, Virginia. Back when we used to be able to do that. And I went to some other trainings. And really, one thing I learned when I was watching these other agencies who were talking about the improvements they made to their response to sexual violence, they always admitted they had issues. They admitted that, right, Houston, we have a problem. Great movie line there. They admitted they had issues and that they had issues but they had a game plan to how they were going to improve them. There really is a great webinar on the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative Training and Technical Assistance Team. That's their webpage down there at the bottom, www.sacitta.org. They have some great webinars, and one way back in 2016, if you can think that far back, 5 years ago. So New Orleans Police Department, they had a webinar on there called Reforming Sexual Assault Response in New Orleans. I think it was like a captain or a division commander. He was talking about really some of the issues they had there. It's like a soup sandwich almost, their response to sexual violence in years past. And they owed up to that, though. And they made some great progress. They made some great improvements to where they really are becoming one of the top agencies in the country to the response to sexual violence. But it started with them admitting they had a problem. Yeah, so we're going to talk about the 4 fixes. So I know my title, the title for this presentation is pretty boring. I admit that. So I wanted to kind of like a catchphrase or a catchy phrase that would kind of interest you guys, or maybe you would remember, be the one thing you remember when you leave this training. So it's the 4 fixes, but I wish I could change it, like to add another F on there. It's the 4 free fixes is what these things are. So I tell you, every one of these things on here, the second you're done with this training, you can drop everything you're doing and get started on all 4 of these, and they're all 4 free. Won't cost you a dime. So we're going to be talking about improving and maintaining your relationships. I'm talking about like with your not only other law enforcement agencies, but with other of your agencies in your community. You're talking about your advocates, talking about your prosecutors, your SANE nurses, and your crime lab. Policies, yeah. Back in 2015, when I was looking into changing our policies in Fayetteville, there really weren't a lot out there in writing. So I found, the agencies were doing some great things, had some great practices out there, but it just wasn't in writing. So just putting something in writing, the great work you're doing, put it in writing, update your policies and practices so you can pass it on to the next generation of detectives. Yeah, training. And I know it's like nice to go to Las Vegas or to Chicago or Miami for training, a week at a time if your agency's willing to spend a couple grand on you. But I mean, some of the best training I got in my 27 and a half years at Fayetteville was sitting at my computer. online, especially the Saki TTA website and then the North Carolina Attorney General's website. It really has some great resources for this project. And then public awareness. I'm talking about increasing your public awareness, being proactive with public awareness, bragging about the great work you're doing with you and your team. And I'll talk about that a little more in detail a little later on here. All right, so yeah, start talking about improving or maintaining your relationship. So I've always said, I've said this several times during some prior trainings, that I came to the Special Victims Unit in September of 2014. I really did inherit a great situation. That we had a SART in place already. The Cumberland County SART, Sexual Assault Response Team, was very robust. We had various agencies, both from military and civilian communities, as we're right next to Fort Bragg, obviously here. So I had those great relationships in place already, and I could kind of see if I wanted to form a SART, it would be a little intimidating, but don't let that stop you from improving relationships. You can still have those SART-like relationships. It just starts by reaching out to folks, law enforcement. So just think about whenever you have your agency, if you have a rash of business armed robberies or a rash of car break-ins in apartment complexes, you're likely reaching out to neighboring jurisdictions in your county, or even reaching out to surrounding counties just to see if they've had anything similar. But really think about it and be honest, because I know I rarely, if ever, did this. How many times are you reaching out to other agencies and talking about rapes, right? Great point in question. Great example of this was back in November of 2016. Lieutenant Farnham with the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, he came and saw me in my office he had one of his detectives with him, but they had a stranger rape, an unsolved stranger rape. It happened just outside the city limits, but it was inside Cumberland County that they were working. He gave me kind of talked about the suspect description, the things the suspect did or said. And at the time, I was very fortunate. That prior summer, I had a really squared away intern who's now actually works for the CIA. She's that squared away. But she created this stranger rape database. Usually got Microsoft Access, and she kind of taught me how to use it too. I wasn't familiar with that program. But she had put a lot of our stranger rapes in that database, and I was able to type in some of the characteristics that Lieutenant Farnham gave me. And one of our cases actually kind of came up as being somewhat similar, some of the similarities as far as the vehicle description, suspect description, what he said and did. So I linked up Lieutenant Farnham with that detective of mine. And our case was an unsolved stranger rape that was from August of 2016. So it was 3 years or 3 months prior to that. So they linked up, they just, exchanged information. And then Cumberland County Sheriff's Office, they actually eventually solved their stranger rape, gave that information to my detective. That helped us solve our stranger rape. And ours was not a DNA case. So it was just all about Lieutenant Farnham coming forward, talking to us. We're exchanging information. I probably wouldn't have reached out to Lieutenant Farnham if our case went unsolved. I probably was not reaching out and doing that. So that's something we can probably do more of: exchange information and help each other solve cases, because we all know rapists don't stay in one jurisdiction. They're crossing lines and raping all over the place. Advocacy. I'm going to tell you, law enforcement, with regards to this sexual assault kit backlog reduction project, advocates, they'll run through a brick wall to help you with this project. They'll do anything you ask them to do. They have them do the heavy lift and all these victim notifications and then offering resources to victims. They'll do all this. They're chomping at the bit to help you with this. They've wanted to for years. And they'll also have your back. And I'm going to tell you what I mean about that. They'll have your back when you have a press conference and announce that you destroyed over 300 sexual assault kits over the years, like we did in Fayetteville. They'll have your back when you have a dumbass detective who's sending inappropriate text messages to victims. Yeah, true story. They'll have your back in the sense that they're not going to like it, of course, but when the media goes and gets a comment from these advocates, not if the media, but when the media goes and gets comments from these advocates, they're not going to be happy about it, obviously, but they're also going to shift focus and say, hey, but don't forget about the great work that Fayetteville Police Department's doing, right? And that's what happened in our cases. SANEs, yeah, SANEs are great. I mean, I'll tell you what, with especially with these cold cases, they didn't have SANEs back then, but they called them nurses' notes. But as you're reading through these nurses' notes, it really does help to have a SANE on hand to help you interpret those notes. And then even like with the current cases, I know in Fayetteville, we had great relationships with our SANEs. My detectives had cell phone numbers for the SANEs that were working, so they could exchange information, real time. When the detective was in the field, they can contact the SANE and vice versa to help exchange information to help the process. I was very fortunate. I inherited, like I said, the great situation I inherited. I had Womack Army Hospital, which is here in Fort Bragg, with Kelly Taylor's the head SANE nurse there, and then Liz Herring, at the time, she was the head SANE nurse in Cape Fear Valley, and at the time they were one of the best same programs in the state. But, you know, I had them on speed dial. We were constantly conversing, trying to improve the process, giving feedback to each other, you know, about interactions with law enforcement, interactions with SANE, and doing training for each other. You know, we had that going on too. But I tell you what, these SANEs, they're very hardworking. They want to get it right. They want your feedback, and they're willing to help you out in any way. Some prosecutions, talk about that. So cops, you're already going to have that relationship with prosecutors. Obviously, they're the ones prosecuting all of your cases. I think you can tighten it up a little bit with the sexual assault cases. And it doesn't matter how many you have. If you have hundreds of sexual assault cases a year, if you just have a handful per year, you want to get them right with your prosecutor's office. So point in fact here, so in Fayetteville, so back, it's probably about 2015, Chief Medlock, he was the chief of police at the time. He met with Billy West, who's still the district attorney here in Cumberland County. But we felt we were having an issue with pre-arrest screening for sexual assault cases, just how it existed. And you know, I was a rape detective back in the 90s and early 2000s. How it existed at the time, it just wasn't very practical. It wasn't very efficient. It was more just, you know, some quick back hallway conversations that maybe lasted a minute or two. And I think we weren't giving the prosecutors the information they needed to make an accurate decision, to make a good decision on these pre-arrest screening and how it existed. So we came up with a protocol in place. We had a dedicated prosecutor that would look at entire case files. We put together an entire case file and give it to that prosecutor for cold cases or current cases, just those cases, and not every single case, but just those cases where maybe is a little bit of a gray area. We just need help tightening it up before we made an arrest, or we just wanted to get some guidance on charges, or whether it was chargeable or not, or prosecutable or not. So I would recommend getting something like that in place if you don't already with your prosecutors with regards to sexual assault cases, just to ensure that they're worked good and that no cases slip through the cracks. So yeah, back in 2014 when I came to the Special Victims Unit, I admit it probably was a little intimidating, just the thought of me contacting the crime lab, calling them, and just you know, talking about cases. But as I got to know them all, you know, with our backlog reduction project, you know, that crime lab, these folks, they're just as motivated as you to do good work and to get to the truth and get justice for victims. They're very, very approachable. And I'll let you know a secret, you know, just Jody West, who's the forensic biology manager, if you buy him a box of donuts, and there's a Dunkin' Donuts right there around the corner, you know, near the Raleigh crime lab, yeah, buy him some donuts, and you don't have to worry about getting for like the rush jobs, the 30-day turnaround jobs. You typically need, you know, prosecutors signing off on that. Yeah, we didn't need that. You know, it was just a phone call or an email, and we got rush jobs without having to go through that red tape. But you know, just started with me reaching out to Jody, getting to know him pretty well, and getting him a box of donuts or two, and just talking to folks up there. But they're really motivated to do good work, and you just highly recommend you go ahead and reach out and you improve that relationship you have with them. So yeah, just military. So if you're next to a military base in North Carolina, you already know what I'm talking about. But if there's any military nexus to any of your cases, even if you're not near a military base, yeah, reach out to CID, or is it NCIS? I guess is, you know, for the Marines and Navy. Yeah, I'll tell you what, Fort Bragg CID, they've helped us contact victims, suspects, witnesses all over the country, really all over the world. We had a couple of victims in Japan that Fort Bragg CID helped us, and they've always dropped what they're doing to help us. I mean, they've gotten buccal swabs from persons of interest. They've gotten buccal swabs from consensual partners. They've really a great resource. So if there is that military nexus with any of your cases, cold or current cases, reach out to your closest military base. They'll be glad to help you. All right, let's talk about policies and practices. So yeah, again, like I said, about 2015 or so, I was looking at improving our written policy, our response to sexual violence, because really it was pretty dated, and you know, some of the terminology, some of the words, it was pretty offensive, to be honest with you. So you want to cover things like initial response. You know, what's patrol's responsibilities? Cover your dispatcher's responsibilities. They're often the first contact between your agency and a victim. So that's very important. That interaction is very important. You know, that part of the process is very important and often overlooked. You know, talk about follow-up investigation, just some basic stuff that your detectives should be doing on every rape case. I get it. Every rape case is going to be a little different. You know, it's going to take you in different directions, but there's some basic stuff that they should be doing for all the cases. Definitely cover your sexual assault kit submission. Now, I know we're fortunate in North Carolina now. We do have the Survivor Act that mandates this 45-day turnaround time for submitting kits once you collect them, for the current kits, that is. But if you even want to tighten it up a little bit more, I mean, get something in writing. I mean, I personally think 14, 21 days is very reasonable. or at the very least, put the Survivor Act in writing in your policy just to make sure cases don't slip through the cracks. So when that next generation of folks come in and take over your unit, that they're aware of the Survivor Act. It's in your policy. It's written in your policy. But I think the thing, if you improve the time, if you make it 14, 21, 28 days, I think you're really sending a message to your community, specifically to survivors in community, that, hey, we're willing to do above and beyond what the Survivor Act mandates, because we take these cases seriously and we're interested in solving your case. So I think if you put something in writing and make it a little more tighten it up a little bit, and make it a little more strict than the Survivor Act requirements, I think that will benefit you within your community. Cover key concepts in your policy. Put it in writing. Your policies, everybody in your agency is supposed to be reading them, right? So get everybody on the same sheet of music to define what victim-centered is, define what trauma-informed questioning, tonic immobility, neurobiology of trauma, define those, put them on the first page of your response to sexual violence policy, just so everybody who has any interaction with victims is aware of these concepts and you're all practicing them in a consistent manner. I'd really recommend you get something in writing regarding unfounded cases. This is one of the things New Orleans admits that they were bad at. They were unfounding almost all their cases. So it made it look like they had no cases, right? When you unfound a case, it comes off your crime number. So it looked like nobody was getting raped in New Orleans because they're improperly unfounding cases. And what I found in a review of all of our old case files in Fayetteville, we were improperly unfounding a lot of these old cases too. So we've got something in writing now where the detective, before he unfounds a case, he has to get the case file, sit down with the unit sergeant and the unit lieutenant and convince them that it does meet the UCR definition of unfounded, to ensure that it is improperly unfounded. Just an extra layer of accountability, but I put that in writing just to make sure your department's properly unfounding these cases. Goes hand in hand with properly coding reports. That was another thing New Orleans admitted they had a problem with. And even in Fayetteville, we had this designation, this UCR designation for report, titling reports called sex offense other. I mean, what's a sex offense other? It was just something, somebody who was in a hurry when they were coding that report, when they were titling that report, could throw sex offense other. We had a calls for service, we had, information report that I think just people were in a hurry. And it's pretty clear that the victim clearly disclosed that she was raped, that the suspect forcibly held her down and forcibly put his penis in her vagina. That's not a sex offense other. It's not a call for service. Call it what it is. So, but there needs to be somebody at your agency, and I recommend it's whoever supervises rape investigations needs to be reviewing all these reports to make sure they're properly coded. I did that. Any report that came to my unit, any of these, especially these sex crimes reports, I would just quickly read over the report, make sure it was properly coded, and if it wasn't, I changed it. I had the authority to change it. If you don't have the authority to change it, just link up with whoever in your department can change it, and just make sure that you're reviewing those reports and getting them properly coded. Again, that will make it look like you're not having as many rapes as you really are, which is a bad thing. So you're doing all this, you're getting these written practices and policies. And again, you might be doing some great things. You might have some great common practices, but put it in writing for sustainability purposes. So when all your hotshot detectives get promoted out of the unit, when all the sergeants and lieutenants, retire or get promoted out of the unit, or you get this nice federal job, you can pass it on to the next group. Next group up can stand up. They can read the policy. They're direct, and they can hit the ground running where you left off. I thought we had a pretty decent policy, a written policy in Fayetteville, I think. I'll be glad to share that with you. I recently had the opportunity to review the Jacksonville, Florida Sheriff's Office policy on response to sexual violence. That's a really great policy. It was recently updated. If I'd have had that policy like 5 years ago in Fayetteville, I probably would have just used their policy as a framework for mine and plagiarized the heck out of their policy. Two really good policies. I know Charlotte Mecklenburg has a great written policy too. So just use another agency's policy to help, for the framework of creating your policy. I really highly recommend you have a written CODICIT protocol. So we were able to create one in Fayetteville through the use of the SACI grant technical assistance team, and we had our police attorneys chime in too. But we actually had that challenged in a suppression hearing. Our written CODICIT protocol was challenged in a suppression hearing here in Cumberland County as a couple summers ago. It was the last case I testified in before I retired. And the judge held up our written CODICIT protocol, but just with the provision that as long as you're abiding by that CODICIT protocol, because you'll find really if you don't have something in writing, a protocol in writing, it's really just a hodgepodge response. It depends on who the detective is, who the supervisor is. And really just over the years in Fayetteville, a lot of these CODIS hit cases slip through the cracks. I mean, a lot of our cold case rape arrests were CODIS hits that were not acted upon. And I think it's just we didn't really know how to work a CODIS hit, or not everybody did, and they just slipped through the cracks. There was nothing in writing how to work these cases. So we have there's one on the Attorney General's website. I'll have that website here shortly on another slide. I'll be glad to get you our copy of ours, but have something in writing when you're working these cases, because if you're reducing your backlog of untested sexual assault kits, the CODIS hits are going to come in, and the larger your backlog, like as Durham or Fayetteville or Charlotte will tell you, the CODIS hits are going to come in quick. All right, again, let's talk about training, and again, free training, not this expensive stuff in Chicago or Las Vegas. It's nice, and I never made my way out there, I guess, for some reason, but a lot of great free training online. I would definitely start with neurobiology of trauma. That needs to be the first training you get before you even approach any sexual violence victim. I of the strong opinion, you don't really have any business interacting with a rape victim unless you're aware of neurobiology of trauma, of that concept. And there's some great training. I know Nurse Kelly Taylor, she's the head say nurse at Womack Army Medical Center that I mentioned earlier. She is a national expert in neurobiology of trauma. The training that she was giving as we were going around the state earlier last year, we have that on our website, or on the AG's website, and there it is. It's at ncdoj.gov, the resources for law enforcement page. If you Google NC resources for law enforcement, it'll be the top page. There's a lot of great resources that the Attorney General's office has put on this web page, including all of the trainings that we've done have been recorded and put on that web page, and including Kelly Taylor's neurobiology of trauma training. Really good stuff. I highly recommend. The first thing you need to do before you start working rape cases is attend that training. Again, the SAKITTA.org website. I get some really great resources on there. Also, there's another neurobiology of trauma webinar on there from Dr. Rebecca Campbell. There's a lot of tools for the various disciplines. It covers all the disciplines on there. It's a pretty overwhelming website. There's a ton of stuff on there. So they've kind of broken it down, and they put a lot of the more relevant items into toolkits for the various disciplines, for law enforcement, for victim notification, for SANE, prosecutors, and crime lab. And you can click on that toolkit and go to a lot of the great resources they have there. They have these virtual academies that are kind of fun. They're interactive. They're kind of fun. They had one for victim notification. So if you want to see me yapping some more, check out the one they have on victim notification. They actually came down to Fayetteville and recorded us and filmed us as we were doing some notifications and talking about them. Have some great resource briefs on there. And I'm not talking about these 70-page resource briefs that nobody really reads. They have some really short, easy to read resource briefs, 2, 3, 4 pages. And I know our advocates here at Rape Crisis Cumberland County took advantage of reviewing these resource briefs and really did up their game as far as getting to know why the other disciplines did what they did. And it really helped them when they're explaining to victims, when they're helping victims navigate the process, to explaining what was going on and why it was going on. Again, one of the newer resource briefs is Core Standards for Sexual Assault Investigations. It's actually only 9 pages long, but it's really, if you're really just starting out with improving your response to sexual violence, I think this would be a great resource brief to start off with. You start off with neurobiology of trauma, go see Kelly Taylor's presentation, then I'd check out that resource brief. It's former cops and current cops put that together, guys who really know what they're talking about. And it's a really great resource. And actually, there is a webinar on the SAKITTA website covering that Core Standards for Sexual Assault Investigators brief that they made. And actually, Andre Richards, he used to be at the Durham Police Department. Really good dude, really knowledgeable guy. He actually gives that webinar. All right, so being proactive with public awareness. And I'm talking about increasing public awareness. So just brag about all the great stuff you're doing. Do a media release, do all your Facebook, your Instagram, your social media blasts. Put out every time you make an arrest. And I'm not talking about just cold cases and current cases. I'm talking about adult victims, talking about child victims. Talk about your child molestation cases, your rape cases. Brag about all the great arrests you're doing, but you talk about the great work your team is doing. When you've reduced 1/4 of your backlog kits, when you've reduced half of your backlog kits, when you tested all of your kits, that's a great story. Put that out there, brag about it. Anytime your team meets and you're making progress towards improving your response to sexual violence, when you're making victim notifications, talk about it, brag about it, put it out there. Do your social media blasts, do your press releases. If it warrants a press conference, do a press conference. I know Durham PD had some great cold case arrests, and they did a press conference covering like all of them at once. Be proactive with public awareness. And what you're going to do, what you'll see is, as you're putting more and more out there, it's going to increase your survivors' confidence in your department. So just think about this. If only 1 out of every 3 victims is coming forward to report rapes, and this is according to the FBI, it's not a number I pulled out of my rear end, that's according to the FBI, Only 1 out of 3 victims are coming forward to file police reports. What are you doing? And I don't care what your profession is, if you're law enforcement, advocacy, whoever, what are you doing in particular to reach out to those 2/3 of those victims who are not coming forward filing police reports with your agencies? 2/3 of victims in your jurisdiction that are getting raped and nothing's getting done about it. What are you doing? If you're doing nothing, then you're allowing victims to continue to get raped. You're allowing these rapists to run free in your community and continue to rape. But if you're proactive with public awareness, if you're talking tough on crime, if you're bragging about the great stuff you're doing, you will see an increase in confidence of survivors. And when you increase their confidence in your agency, what are they going to do? They're more likely to come forward and file a police report with you and go through the process. You'll see an increase. You'll see a cycle. You'll improve the confidence of survivors. You'll see a spike in police reports like we saw in Fayetteville in 2016 and 2017. And that should lead to an increase in arrests, right? And then you're bragging about those great arrests, right? Either a press conference, social media blast, media blasts, all of the above. That cycle will continue, and you'll see your numbers go up. And really, numbers going up for rapes, that's the one crime, like if the numbers go up, that's a good thing. I think like really progressive administrators, progressive leaders realize it's a good thing if your rape numbers go up. Everything else is bad, but if your rape numbers go up, that means you're reaching out to those victims who typically unreport. You're decreasing the number of unreported rapes. That should be any smart administrator's goal. Decrease the number of unreported rapes. What is your department doing to do that? This is the way you do it. Be proactive with public awareness. You convince those, you have to sell your department to the survivors who aren't coming forward. And they will. Your numbers will go up, your arrests will go up, and that cycle will continue, I guarantee it. Yeah, don't forget about genetic genealogy. There's fanboy me with CC Moore. She actually was the head genetic genealogist who solved our 2 unsolved serial rape cases that we use forensic genealogy. She actually came to Fayetteville in 2019. They filmed a little something for a show they were doing, so I had a chance to meet her. Just keep that in mind. In North Carolina, that's my successor at Fayetteville Police Department, Lieutenant Petty. He's got some funding from the 2020 Psaki grant. He has some funding earmarked to help out agencies throughout the state with forensic genetic genealogy. So just get with Lieutenant Petty or get with me. I'll link you up with him. I know they're still going through some red tape with getting the funds appropriated or something, but that's set to get up and running. He's got some funding, I think, to do at least 6 or 7 of these tests, because they are quite expensive. But I know a couple agencies in North Carolina have already reached out to me, and I've linked them up with him. But if funding is an issue with you, just get with me and I can link you up with Lieutenant Petty. But please make sure that you take advantage of familial DNA testing that the State Crime Lab does before you consider genetic genealogy testing. The familial DNA testing is free. It's a different type of testing. The State Crime Lab does it. I know they've done it for a couple cases, a couple of Fayetteville cases. I think Raleigh PD's used it a couple of times, and it's been used a few times throughout the state. But I'd recommend using that first before you use genetic genealogy, because you could possibly solve your case doing the familial DNA search. Okay, so just to sum it up, my 4 fixes, or maybe a little more catchy tune, is 4 free fixes. So again, improving and maintaining your relationships with law enforcement and the other disciplines in your community. Update those old policies and practices. Just you want to ensure sustainability in your department by having it in writing, having how to work these cases in writing, so you can pass it on to the next group of detectives and supervisors that comes to the unit. Training. The free training that I went over, those 2 websites, I think, have everything you need to improve your agency's response to sexual violence. It's free. Yeah, it'd be nice to go to Las Vegas, but everything you need is on those 2 websites that I went over earlier. And then be proactive with public awareness. Brag about the great work you're doing. Increase survivors' confidence, so they're going to come forward to your department, and you'll put more bad guys in jail. I guarantee it. That's all I have. If you do need me, please feel free to call me. That's my cell number. You can call me anytime, text me. There's my email. I'll be glad to help you out with whatever I can. I really do appreciate you guys being here. Thank you.